Jayce Joseph. He had really big feet when he was born. He had really big feet.
Welcome to Still a Part of Us, a place where moms and dads share the story of their child who was stillborn or who died in infancy. I'm Winter.
And I'm Lee. We are grateful you joined us today. Please note that this is a story of loss and has triggers.
Thanks to our lost parents who are willing to be vulnerable and share their children with us.
If you're listening to this podcast, just know that on our YouTube channel there are pictures and videos that are related to the stories that are being shared.
Subscribe and share it with a friend that might need it, and tell them to subscribe. Why? Because people need to know that even though our babies are no longer with us, they're still a part of us. Ryannah, thank you so much for coming and talking about your son Jayce today. Welcome. We're so excited to have you today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you guys living right now, and what does your family look like, and especially at the time when Jayce was born?
So right now, my fiance and I, we are currently active duty Air Force. So we are stationed in Tucson, Arizona. At the time of his birth, because we live so far away from family, it was just the two of us here. Our families knew that we were pregnant, and they knew what was happening kind of as it was happening.
Mm-hmm.
But it was just the two of us here.
And where is family for both of you? Is it like back east, or everybody's everywhere?
Kind of, yeah, a little bit of he's from Boston, so that's where his family is situated. And I have my immediate family, my mom and my brothers and my stepdad. They live down in Georgia.
Okay.
And my cousins, they live in Pennsylvania.
Okay. So a lot of people back east from where you're at. And that's hard. I mean, just to kind of acknowledge that this would have been really hard to do by yourself. And did your fiance, did you guys both meet while serving, or how did you guys meet?
We did. Okay. We met while serving. We met on a night out. I was with some friends. It was near Christmas time, and actually we decided to go ahead and start dating. I was tasked to deploy, and my tasking had fell through, and that was kind of what really brought us together.
Oh.
Yeah, I know it's strange, but it's definitely different, the culture when you're in. I don't know how to explain it.
Yes.
It's just something you have to experience.
Yeah. Yeah. That's pretty cool. And you guys, how long have you guys been together?
We are going on 2 years. Yes, 2 years.
Great.
3 years?
It's something like that.
Yeah, we are going on 3 years.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I don't know. I had a brain fart.
It happens. And at the time, can you, just for a little bit of background, when was Jayce born? Just at the time of this recording.
It is exactly 8 months. 8 months ago.
So still very, very new for you at the time of this recording. So thank you again for being on here and being willing to talk about that. And besides being active duty, is there anything that you guys like to do just as hobbies and that you like to do together or separately?
We watch a lot of documentaries together.
Really?
We are obsessed with Netflix original documentaries. Doesn't really matter what they're about. And he is trying to get me into exercising.
Trying?
Yes, it's a work in progress.
That's great. That's pretty funny. Trying to get you into it.
Trying, yeah. We have a home gym, and he's like, "You can come in here and work out with me." I'm like, "I'm okay.
I'm fine. I'm gonna go hang out over here." That's great. Well, so you guys have been deployed in Arizona, and so tell me, actually, were you guys planning on getting pregnant, or was that a complete surprise to you?
It was a surprise. The night of his conception was our 1-year anniversary, and it was the first time that we had told each other that we loved each other.
Oh, really?
Yes, so that night, I was actually really excited to be able to tell him that when he was born, that he was conceived in a night that was full of so much love. And I know it seems like so cliche, but that was the night where like we really, we'd been together for a year and we had really decided that we wanted to take it on to something serious. So being able to tell him that I loved him and, he felt the same way. And then knowing that Jayce was a product of that was something that was so beautiful.
Yeah.
In my eyes.
That's so sweet. Like, that's really so sweet. Yeah, and that is actually kind of a nice thought to be able to like, oh yeah, you're a product of our love, which is that's great.
Yeah.
So you were surprised though, and how did that go? Like when you took the pregnancy test, how did that go when you found out, and how you told your fiance?
So, I went to work that day, and I had been feeling nauseous, and I just remember thinking, "This is weird." And I had anxiety in the past, and I knew that if you went to the doctor, like they have like a dissolvable tab that they can give you to kind of help ease the nausea.
Right.
So I went and like I told my boss, I was like, hey, like I'm gonna go to the doctors really quick and see if they can give me something quick, and pretty much like I'll be right back.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, okay, yeah, do your thing. So I went to the doctor, and they made me pee in a cup. And the doctor comes back in and she goes, so you're pregnant. I just remember looking at her. I was like, me? And she was like, yes, you're the only one in here. And I was like, oh, wow. And she's like, so I asked her, I was like, can you go get the test? Like I wanted to see it because there was a part of me that didn't actually believe it.
Right.
And at the time I was seeing an off-base OB, because I had some concerns, not necessarily about fertility, kind of like hand in hand, like there were just some things that I wanted to get checked out, and I got a referral off base. And so the day that I found out I was pregnant, I actually had an ultrasound appointment.
Really?
Yes. I had an appointment for them because they were just going to go in and look at my ovaries and, just make sure that everything was good to go. And, I had every intention of getting back on birth control. I had been on it for so long. I was just kind of like maybe a little nutty. Like I wanted to make sure everything was okay.
Right.
And so they were like, yeah, that's fine. And so I walked in and I was like, hey, actually, can you see if there's something else in there? And there he was. And she goes, you're about 6 weeks and 2 days.
Oh.
And I was like, 6 weeks? And I remember because at the time it was, COVID was a super heavy thing. So we weren't allowed to have any guests with us throughout the process.
Yeah.
And so he was sitting in the car and I sent the picture to him and he goes, I think it was like the egg or the yolk sac.
Yeah.
And my fiance, he is an EMT as well as a firefighter.
Oh.
And he looked at the ultrasound and he was like, you're about 6 weeks. And I was like, how do you know that? I was like, yes, I am actually.
He totally knew.
He was like, yeah. And I just remember thinking, wow, that is a long time for something to be happening in my body and no one telling me. Like, I'm just here. It's fine. Do what you want. That's fine.
Well, first of all, I'm going to just say that is such I think that's such a fun coincidence that you had an ultrasound planned and that you got to see him so early because that doesn't usually happen. So I think that's really cool that you got to see him that soon. What was your fiance's reaction when you told him that you were pregnant?
So it's so funny. He was at the fire department and I got the pregnancy test and I kept it when I left the doctor's office. And I was on FaceTime with my best friend. And I told her, I was like, yeah, like I'll call you right back once I get out. And she jokingly was like, hope you're not pregnant, or maybe you are pregnant. And I was like, I don't think so. And so I go out and I didn't call her back because obviously I wanted my fiance to be the first person that I told. And I just remember he comes in and he gets into the car, and we had been together. Like, I knew that I loved him and I knew that he loved me. But this was the first time I had ever fallen pregnant. Like, I didn't know. I was very nervous. And I just remember he got into the car because I had called him. I was like, "Are you busy?" And he knew I was going to the doctor, and he was like, "No." And so he comes outside, and this is prior to the ultrasound. And he comes outside, he gets into my car, and he looks at me, and I just start bawling. And he's like, "What's wrong?" I was like, "I'm pregnant." And he was like, "It's okay." And I was like, "Okay." He was like, "We're going to do this. It's fine. It's fine." And I just remember him saying, "I hope it's a boy." So he wanted a boy from the very beginning.
From the very beginning. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. He was not mad. I think we were both overwhelmed with how scared and nervous we were.
Yeah, totally.
But we were also both very excited as well.
Oh, that's great. That's so great.
Mm-hmm.
So then you find out and you actually get to see Jayce very early on, which is so great. How did the rest of that first trimester go? Were you still pretty nauseous?
Yes. He kicked my butt my entire first trimester, every single morning. And I was working a really early morning shift, so I had to be to work at 4:30, 5:30. So I was waking up at like 4.
Yeah.
And I remember every single morning I threw up. And we lived in a really tiny apartment at the time, so our bathroom was like pretty much attached to the bedroom. And so when I would go and brush my teeth, I would have to go into the kitchen area because he would still be sleeping.
Right.
And I'd have to brush my teeth in the kitchen sink, and I would barf in there every single morning. And I just remember it was rough. It was so rough.
Yeah.
It's hard.
It can be. That first trimester can be a doozy depending on how it is. So you were pretty sick then.
Yes.
Did you get to go to any other ultrasounds in that first trimester?
I believe so. I have an I think I was about 12 weeks when I got my
another
second ultrasound.
Okay.
Because I have one ultrasound where he looks like a little Cheerio, and then I have another ultrasound photo where he actually looks like a little baby. Like he looks like a person. I remember taking it in, and by that point, only one of my coworkers knew because I wanted to keep it a secret. And I just remember showing him. I was like, "Look at this! Like, it's a person. It's a whole person. Like, it has a head. It has a body." So I just remember being really amazed at how developed he was or how he looked, because I had no idea that was a thing.
Yeah. It's it's amazing to see their development. Now you didn't know his gender at the time, right? Or did you guys do any sort of genetic testing or that type of stuff early on?
So we did genetic testing. I do have cerebral palsy that kind of runs in my family, but not my immediate family, kind of like my cousins.
Gotcha.
So that was something that I was a little worried about because it was on my aunt's side. So it was on my mother's side. So it was something that I was a little concerned about. So we found out the gender. I think it was fairly early that we found out the gender.
Yeah, because I think you can do it almost 10 to 12 weeks. It's really early when you do the genetic testing. So you guys wanted to make sure that everything looked good, and then they can tell you then, I think, at that time. So did you guys want to find out whether you were going to have a boy or girl?
Yes. Because we have such a small, my partner and I, we are very, I don't know what the word is. We're very private with our lives, I guess is the word. And so, we didn't do this huge gender reveal. I got a phone call saying that the results were in. They went over everything on the phone, and they told me that they had the gender. And I was like, "Please don't tell me. Can you just put it in an envelope and I will come and pick it up?" And they were like, "Yeah, of course." So I drive to the OB's office. I pick up the envelope and I call my partner and I'm like, hey, I have the gender. And his reaction was, you found out the gender without me? And I was like,
No.
no, I have it in an envelope. And he was like, oh, okay. And so I drive to the fire department and I park and he comes out and he gets in my car and we open it up and we look at everything together. And I remember it was on the second page and it was at the top. And I saw it before he did. And there was a brief moment where I was like, darn it, because we could not agree on any names. It wasn't that I didn't want a boy. It was just that we could not agree on names. And I was like, darn it, like he is going to get his way with this one. And he hit the roof. Like he was so happy. He was so excited. He was like, this is my luck. I'm so excited. Like, it's awesome. Like the smile on his face was huge.
That's so fun. That is so fun. I'm glad you guys got to look at it together. I mean, like find that out together. So, so you guys know that you're gonna have a boy, which is so exciting. So it sounds like he definitely had some names already queued up. Was Jayce on the list already, or had you guys shared that with each other?
So actually, because we couldn't agree on any names, we started talking to his mom, and she was obviously super stoked that she was going to be a grandma.
Yeah,
so
totally.
She actually sent him a list of baby names that she liked. And we knew from the beginning that we were going to incorporate the name Joseph because that was his grandfather's name. And his grandfather had passed away a few months prior to us finding out that we were pregnant. And so I said, how awesome is it that we're going to have a boy? We could give him your grandfather's name. So we already knew his middle name.
Yeah.
And with the list that his mother sent, we went down, we looked at the name, and there were two names that we kind of went back and forth on. And we ended up with Jayce. And I think it just stuck. Because at first there was like a little bit like, well, we might change it, we might not. And then whenever we would talk about him, oh, Jayce this and Jayce that, and then it was his name.
It was his name. That's who he was.
His name. Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's cute. And so it really was your fiance's mom's. That was on the list.
So she named him. She sure did.
That's great. It's kind of a fun little story to tell about that.
The other names we had picked out, it was stressing me out. I was like, this cannot happen. No. So I was grateful for her in the list that she sent.
Yeah, that's actually kind of nice. You're like, you can take it, you can leave it.
Exactly.
Awesome. Okay, so you are heading into your second trimester. How are you feeling at the second trimester?
So in the second trimester, I remember I was still pretty sick up until the 14, 15 week mark, where I was still really, really nauseous. And after about like the 14, 15 week mark, I'm not for sure which one, everything started to somewhat subside. But by that point, I could actually already feel the flutters of him. So I was very acquainted with how it felt when he moved, which being so early, like I know usually they're like, well, like it's just the flutters, like you don't actually feel the movement. And at first I wasn't sure what it was. And so I talked to my OB and she's like, that very well could be your baby moving. And I was like, oh, wow. Like I didn't know that. So he was always very active when I would go to bed.
Yeah, that's pretty early to feel him. So that's cool. So he's feeling, you could feel him, and probably your fiance couldn't quite feel him yet because that's still a bit early. But you're feeling a little bit better. It sounds like once you hit week 14, 15 or so. And were you guys planning on getting the anatomy scan or the ultrasound that's kind of around week 20 or so?
Yes, actually. So when I was around 18 weeks pregnant, I got sick with COVID. Someone had directly exposed me to it. And I got really sick. Not, to me, it felt like a common cold. And at the time, I just remember the doctor saying that COVID wasn't really linked to an increase in any issues unless there was like major hospitalization or they needed to keep, you overnight for something. And I remember when I called the office, they were just like, well, we can't see you until you test negative. And pretty much like you'll have to be the last client of the day. And that's pretty much all we can do for you. There was no other guidance on like what to take or what to watch out for. And I had never in my adult life had a fever. And so there was one day I had a fever in the apartment, and we were keeping isolated aside from bedtime because our apartment was so small at the time. And I remember I walked out and I remember him saying, well, you look like you're in a good mood. And I was like, yeah, like I feel okay. Like I'm tired, but, I couldn't taste or smell.
Oh, okay.
But he was like, well, I'm going to take your temperature. And my temperature was 101.9. And I had no idea because usually I run really cold to the touch. I know it seems strange, but usually like I'm like ice cold to the touch. So when I had a fever, I was warm. But like I wasn't hot, I wasn't uncomfortable. Usually being cold, like I'm always really uncomfortable. I'm always bundled up. So it was like I was like comfortable. I was like, oh, like I feel fine. And he was like, no, like can you lay down, took some Tylenol, put the rag on my head. And I had listened to Jayce's heartbeat on 2 separate occasions while I had COVID. I think there was 2 separate days. Probably like one day after the next, if I'm being completely honest, like within that first week or so of me being sick because I was on quarantine for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And we did not make it to the 20-week anatomy scan. Towards the end, I couldn't find his heartbeat. And I had just assumed that it was me. I have a fetal Doppler. And up until that point, like I could find his heartbeat pretty regularly. Like it wasn't an issue for me to find his heartbeat. And then it wasn't until I realized that I couldn't get him to move either. I would do this thing where like if I kind of like laid on my stomach, I could get him to I could feel the flutters. It was almost like stop laying on me, like stop pushing on me. So, like I would try and lay on my stomach to see if I could jumpstart something. I'm not sure what I was looking for, but I didn't feel it. And I went on for about a week. I didn't realize that it had been that long. I went back to work. I was at work for one day. And then, like, I just remember I told my boss, I was like, I don't think I've felt my baby move. And she was like, well, like everything could be okay. Like, like, don't stress. Like sometimes babies take off days. And I was like, like, yeah, like you're right. I was sick. Like maybe he's sleeping. I don't know. And I remember the next night, my fiance was working a 48 at the fire department, and there was a really bad storm that night. I just remember I had so much anxiety because I had not felt him move. I couldn't find his heartbeat. And so I remember I called the after-hour line for my OB, and I remember the nurse or the person who answered the phone pretty much asking if I wanted them to get the on-call OB. And I remember thinking, like, maybe I'm over-exaggerating. When I first found out I was pregnant, like 2 days after I found out I was pregnant, I went into the ER because I was cramping because I did not know that that was the thing that happens in pregnancy. So it was something that scared me. And I thought, well, maybe I'm overreacting again. And so I was like, no, it's okay. Mind you, it's like 1 o'clock in the morning. I couldn't sleep. It was something that was really bothering me. And I kind of just pushed it aside. and I went to work the next morning, and I waited for the actual duty day to start because we worked so early. We were shift workers at the time.
Oh, okay.
So I waited until like 7:30, 8 o'clock, like when my boss came in, and I just kind of looked at her, and I don't know why, but when I started to ask, like I started to cry, and I was like, I think I need to go to the ER. I haven't felt my baby move. And she was like, do you want to take someone with you? And I was like, absolutely not. And so I left. And I called. We have a hotline that you call if you're going to go to the doctors of any sorts that's not on base, just to get proper coverage for your insurance. And I remember I called what it's called the nurse advice line, and she was asking me questions. And she asked, when's the last time I felt him? And I was like, like it's only been a few days. And, like I gave her the days. I don't remember exactly what the days are, but I remember her saying to me, honey, that's a week. I just remember, like, I sat and I was like, oh my goodness. So I got off of the phone with the nurse from the nurse advice line, and my OB's office they called me back.
Oh, good.
And the hospital and the OB's office, they work hand in hand. So that's where I would have delivered anyway. And the nurse told me to go directly there. But after I got the call from my OB, I opted to go with them first versus going straight into the ER. So I went in, and I was able to be seen by the nurse practitioner, and she couldn't find the heartbeat with the fetal Doppler either. And I just remember, the whole time I was laying on the bed, and I remember being extremely hysterical. And they brought in like this handheld, like ultrasound thing. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but it kind of works like a fetal Doppler, but they can see it's not an actual ultrasound.
Yeah.
But it's like a handheld one.
Right. Okay.
And she brought it in, and she could see the baby. And I remember when she was checking for my heartbeat, she kept saying, well, that's too fast to be yours. Maybe it wasn't because of how stressed I was. So maybe my heart was beating really fast. I'm not sure. But I remember her exact words to me when she couldn't find the heartbeat on either. She said, we'll send you across the street to the actual ultrasound center for peace of mind. Peace of mind is what really stuck out to me, because that doesn't sound like it doesn't sound like they're going to tell you that your baby's gone.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I went over to the actual ultrasound center, and I waited for about 2 hours. And I remember before I left, they were so worried. They were like, we need to make sure that you're still not positive for COVID. And I was like, I'm not. I tested negative. And they were like, okay, that's fine. Because initially, like, I don't know if there was some hesitation in whether or not they actually wanted to bring me in, because I had been exposed a little over 2 weeks prior.
Right.
And I was like, like at that point, very selfishly, but it's how I felt in the moment. I was like, who cares?
Yeah.
And, like, that's super selfish, but I just wanted to make sure that everything was okay with my baby. And so I remember feeling really anxious and also really annoyed, but I know that they were just doing their job. But that was a really big thing. And when they finally called me back into the office, I was there alone. And I don't think that day, I told my fiance that I was going to the hospital.
Oh, you didn't?
Because I did not want to worry him. Again, I thought I was overreacting. And I have been known to do that sometimes. So I was just kind of hoping it was one of those situations. And I remember going into the room, and the nurse, she put the jelly on my belly, and she was so quiet. And I had to ask her, I said, is everything okay? Is he okay? And I just remember her saying, there's no heartbeat. I just remember begging her. I was like, can you check again? Can you do the transvaginal ultrasound? Can you, like anything? And she was like, it's not going to make a difference. She was like, we can try something else. And I just remember like I lost it. She was like, okay, I'm going to go get the doctor. And I was like, I don't want the doctor here. I want you to find his heartbeat. And the doctor came in and they pulled me into this little room and they were like, is there anyone we can call for you? And I just remember thinking, my fiance's on shift. I'll call him. And they, I called him while I was in the room. Actually, I called him while I was in the room getting the ultrasound. And he was on the phone when the actual doctor came in because I was so beside myself.
Yeah.
And so he was like, okay, I will come down there. I'll get down there. And so he went and he talked to his chief and they were able to let him go. And he came. And I just remember not knowing what to do with myself. And I felt like it was my fault because the person that had exposed me to COVID, at that point, I had figured that it was COVID. We came back low risk for everything. And even now, there's nothing that points to anything else. It was because I got sick. And I don't know if it was because maybe I wasn't watching my fever as closely as I should have. There's so many things that maybe I could have done that maybe I didn't. I cramped a lot when I was sick with COVID. And I kept telling myself that it was discomfort over pain, but it was to the point where I couldn't even stand. And I just kept telling myself, no, I'm just uncomfortable. I don't know why, but I had it in my head that it was just discomfort. And they pretty much put us in touch with a support group. And the woman, they sent us home with a bunch of pamphlets and books and, things to look at. And I remember the doctor saying to me, okay, we are going to get you over to labor and delivery. And, we're going to go ahead and induce you. And I just remember looking at her. I was so sad. And I said, I have to push him out. And she was like, yeah. And I just remember feeling like that was so strange. But we went home that day. The coordinator, she called, very sweet lady. And I remember the first time she called, I just brushed her off. I didn't want to talk to her. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I was like, there's no way you can tell me or help me feel how I should be feeling. There's nothing you can say that's going to make me feel better. And she was very persistent. God bless her for that. She was very persistent. She kept calling and she helped me actually develop a birthing plan. And then I started to read the pamphlets that they had sent me home with. And then I realized that the woman that I was talking to on the phone was actually the author of the pamphlets that they had sent. Mm-hmm.
Wow. Had she experienced a loss, or was she very familiar with how she's helped people before?
Both. So she lost. She's had her fair share of losses, and she does what she does. She wrote books, and the support group is actually the one that they kind of push at this OB's office. It's called the Embrace Circle. Mm-hmm. And she was very helpful, and she told us all kinds of things that were available to us that I didn't even know about at first. When she suggested, having someone take pictures, I thought that was the strangest thing because to me, I was kind of in this headspace where I couldn't believe that it was happening. And also, why would I want someone to take a picture of me on my worst day ever?
Yeah.
But then I realized it wasn't about me. It was about our son. And so we created this whole list of everything. And the hospital, they had asked us when we wanted to come in. And I remember the day that I found out, I did not want to carry him any longer than I needed to. So I said, today, I want to come in today. And they were like, we really recommend that you think about that. You know, it won't be until later anyway. So, you know, like go home and think it over, figure out what you want to do, pack your bags, all of this. And mind you, I'm only 20 weeks and 3 days. I have no idea what goes in a hospital bag. Like I hadn't gotten that far.
Yeah, exactly.
After speaking with the lady on the phone, she recommended that we wait. She was like, wait a day or so and see how you feel. And after talking it over with my fiance, he agreed. He was like, why don't we wait? Let's make sure that, you know, this experience is going to be something that, let's make it all it can be, essentially. So we were able to reach out to the Now I Lay Me Down to Sleep. It's a kind of a group that specializes in infant loss photos.
Yeah.
And they do it for free. It's at no charge. She kind of gave us a list of everything that we were able to do. And I know we wanted my fiance to cut the umbilical cord. That was still something that we wanted to take care of. She mentioned something about bathing. And I just remember asking her because I wasn't sure what to expect. And she told me that we could bathe our son, but that it may not be something that we want to do because of how early we were. She hinted and she kind of warned that his skin would be really fragile. So it may or may not be in his best interest. And so we ended up neglecting to do that. We, you know, just kind of decided that wasn't something that we even wanted to pursue.
Yeah.
And I remember calling the hospital and telling them that we were going to wait, and we decided to go in that Friday. And it was a Wednesday when we found out. And so I called on that Friday and I checked the status of the room. They did not want us to come in through triage. They told us that they would call us when they had a room available. So I said, okay. And I called on Friday just to check the status of the room to see what time we should be heading in. And we just kind of kept getting bumped back because there were other women with live babies that were coming through, which took precedence, which made total sense. It was a little hard to kind of take that, but like I understood. Yeah. And on Saturday, I had called and I said, hey, just checking to see like what's going on. And they were like, well, you know, there's still no rooms left. I just remember thinking, oh my goodness, like they're never going to see us, you know, and they just kept telling us that there was no risk to us, to me, to keep him in that long. And there was a small part of me that was okay with that because I knew that as long as I was home, that the three of us were together. So I did take some solace in that. But I remember after I'd gotten off the phone with checking on that Saturday, I had sat down and I tried to eat something, realized I wasn't hungry, and I had to go to the bathroom. And I realized that I was bleeding.
Oh.
Really bad.
Oh, really?
And yeah, it was really, really bad. And so I told my fiance, I said, we have to go and we have to go now. So we changed, and the hospital was maybe a 10-minute drive from our apartment at the time. It was like straight shot all the way down. Mm-hmm. It was like downhill. So we actually got there fairly quickly once we got into the car. And I just remember thinking, because he was like, okay, like I'm going to grab the bags, like you head down. And I was like, okay. And I was in the car and I just remember thinking, hurry up, like what is taking so long? And I was getting agitated and I was irritated. I was scared. I was stressed. And in reality, he was right behind me. It just felt like everything was moving so slow and I was the one moving fast. Like everybody else was like, you know, like it wasn't moving fast enough for me. And we got to the hospital. And as soon as we got into the parking lot, I stepped out of the car and my water broke. I didn't realize that that's what was happening. So when it started to happen, I started to scream. And I remember him saying, "It's okay, stop, like, don't scream, it's okay, like, the entrance is right there." So I was bleeding, I was wet, and I had no idea, like, what was going on. And, we walked in, and I remember the receptionist being kind of callous. Like, I walked in and, like, I'm bleeding and I'm wet, and maybe she didn't know, like maybe she didn't know, but again, like in my head, like I felt like everything was happening so fast, and I just like I wanted somebody to come up to me and say, "Hey, like it's going to be okay." Um and I just like that wasn't the reality at the time, so I walked in and I was like, "I need a doctor. I don't know what's happening. I'm bleeding and now I'm wet." And she was like, "Name and date of birth." And I just remember thinking, "No, that has to wait." And my fiance, he was like, "Okay, right, just take a breath, go sit." And he was able to handle everything. And he was like, "Can we get some towels? Like she's soaking wet." By the time we got into the room, I realized that they had put us in a room that was in quarantine because they thought that we still had COVID.
Oh.
No, we don't.
Yeah.
They thought, and I just remember saying, "We don't have COVID. Like, I don't have COVID. That was over 2 weeks ago. Like, we are cleared. Like, we were tested. We were given the green light to go back to work. Like, we are fine." And we got into the room, and they told me that I had started to hemorrhage a little bit, but that everything was okay. And I was like, "Okay." They got me cleaned up, and that was when the nurse explained to me. She said, "That was just your water that broke." Which was really strange to me because I didn't even know that that was a thing. I didn't know that that was a possibility. That wasn't something that I was told to watch out for. Maybe it was because we didn't realize it would get to that point.
Right.
I have no idea. And so I remember we kind of got cleaned up. We were admitted into the room. And once everything calmed down, the nurses on staff were like angels. I don't know who, like I have 2 of their names written down in his baby book. But the nurse that I had initially as well, I don't think I remember her name. I don't think I wrote it down. But they were amazing. Amazing. I can't even begin to describe how normal they tried to make the situation feel for us. It was just unbelievable. And I remember they came in and they had asked us if we wanted to eat something, because once they started labor, they asked me if I wanted an epidural, and I said yes. And they said, "Well, once we give it to you, you can't eat," because by the time I had gone in, I was already a centimeter dilated.
Oh, okay.
And so they were like, "Yeah, like we can give you an epidural, but you might want to eat something first." So I just remember eating whatever they had on hand. And my fiance went and he grabbed something. And the nurses came in and she was like, "Okay, like we're just waiting on the anesthesiologist, and he'll come in." And when he came into the room, the anesthesiologist, I remember not really knowing what to expect. But I know that they numbed my back prior to, and I remember I had a nurse pushing on my shoulders, and I was leaning over the bed and she was kind of like pushing, and I could see my fiance sitting on the bench, like kind of out of the way. And it was not painful at all. And I remember looking over at him, and like he just gives me this really big thumbs up. He's like, "You're doing great. You're doing great." And I found out later afterwards, he said, "Rye, I saw the size of the needle and I started to panic for you." I was like, "I didn't feel anything." So after that, I was in labor for about 6 hours. They gave me Pitocin, and they had the belt connected to my stomach to watch for contractions. But because I was so little, it was really hard for them to see on the monitor what was going on. And so I just remember thinking, I did not really know what a contraction felt like.
Okay.
So this was all like very new to me, like as it was happening. And they told me that I could dose myself with the epidural as much as I needed, up to twice in an hour, because there was no risk to the baby.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember specifically asking the nurses if there was a possibility that my baby could come and nobody be in the room. And she said, it's very common. Yes, it's a possibility. And so I dosed myself once in the beginning, and then I sat through every contraction after that.
You
because
did.
I wanted to make sure that there was somebody in the room when he was ready to come. And so I remember I downloaded a contraction counter on my phone, and I was on the phone with my mom. My fiance, he had fallen asleep. It was late. And I remember the nurse came in and she had asked me if everything was okay. And I was like, yeah, like I think the contractions are getting a little closer. And she could kind of see when I was having a contraction because I would just kind of tense up. And I remember her specifically telling me, if you feel any pressure down there, you hit the call button and I'll come back in. And I was like, okay, that sounds fine. Emotions were running a little low at this point. I think like we were just really exhausted.
Right.
And so I couldn't get comfortable. I couldn't sleep. My mom was on the phone and I was just letting her know that, pretty much no news quite yet.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember my mom saying that she was getting a call from my brother, which she thought was really weird, because my brother never calls that late. And I was like, well, like it could be important, just answer the phone. And she was like, okay. And I got off the phone with her, and probably about 10 to 15 minutes later, I felt that pressure and I hit the button. They ask, and I was like, I think I feel some pressure down there. And I felt like it took an eternity for the nurses to come in, but in reality, it was like a whole different team that came in. And I remember one of the nurses, she called me mama, and she was like, okay, like it's time. And I just remember like not really knowing what to think, like, oh my goodness, like there was a part of me that had kind of, I guess, surrendered to how I was feeling. And I kind of put it aside, this sadness. And I was really excited to be able to meet my baby. So once we got into the hospital and everything calmed down, I just remember having, and it's so strange to say because it hurts, but I was excited to meet my baby. And so when they came in and they said it was time, I was like, oh my goodness, like I can't believe this is happening. And I was able to move one of my legs. And I remember I had told my fiance prior to any of this happening that I wanted him to stay up near my head. I want you up at my head. And so he was like, okay. And so once everything happened, he came over and he grabbed my hand, and I was able to put one of my legs up, and one of my legs was a complete stump.
Mm-hmm.
And she was like, can you move that one? And I was like, I cannot. And so she had to prop it up. And she said, whenever you're ready, give us a push. I pushed one time, and I immediately sat up because I saw him slide out. And the biggest thing that I remember in that moment was how quiet it was in the room. And he was perfect. But when he was born, his mouth was open. And that was something that like shook me to my core. Because I knew he wasn't going to be alive. I knew he wasn't alive. But just to see him, it was really hard. And I remember the nurses asking me if I wanted to do skin to skin contact. And I remember thinking, of course, that's my son. Like, give him to me. Yeah. Like I was so excited. And they gave him to me. And one of the things that the woman that I had spoken to, I don't remember her title, but she had told me, she said, look at your baby. They are not they're fragile, but they're not. Treat them like you would a normal baby. And one of the things that she told me was, she said, look at every part of your baby's body, memorize it. And I said, okay. And I remember, we looked at everything, his head, his arms, his fingers. He had really big feet, really big feet, really big feet. He was 9 inches long. And I just remember thinking, and me and my fiance, we had talked about it. We were like, he was going to be a big one. Like we had it in our head that he was going to be this big, strong, strapping young man,
Yeah.
And I remember my fiance, he teases me and he tells me that I have big feet all the time. Like it used to hurt my feelings. And then, when we had Jayce, he goes, look, Rye, he has your feet. And I just remember like looking at his feet, and he had 10 toes, he had 10 fingers, like small things. And, like I remember my fiance, and he was holding him and he was looking at him, because I told him, I said, like, this is what they said, would help us. And so, we were both just kind of exploring our son's body. And it sounds so strange to say, but and I'm glad we did, because those are things that you honestly, like, you don't want to forget. And I remember my fiance looking at me and saying, oh my goodness, he has a wiener. And I'm like, it's a boy. It's a boy. And he was like, I know, but like, I guess like he just wasn't expecting there to be anything. And so that was something that, to this day, like I still pick on him for. I'm like, because he was so like I couldn't,
Right.
I couldn't believe it. I know it sounds so strange, but he was just so awestruck. He was like, I can't believe it. Yes, we knew he was a boy. This is how we knew it was a boy.
Oh, that's pretty funny.
Yeah. They the nurses, they brought in the cuddle cot, and so he stayed in the room with us. My nighttime nurse, she came in, and I had just asked, I was kind of out of it. I was really tired.
What time was he born? Can you remind me? Because you got admitted on Saturday, right?
Yes, ma'am. He was born at 11:41 p.m.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. I do remember there was only nurses in the room when he was born, and the doctor came in like right as everything was kind of over, right after he had cut the umbilical cord, and like we were holding him, and I didn't really know what to expect. So I remember them saying, asking me like how I felt, and pretty much that within the next few minutes that we were going to give birth to the placenta.
Mm-hmm.
And, like I thought that meant I was going to push it. I had no idea what to expect.
Yeah.
And so the doctor comes in, and I had no idea that, like that they could do that, but she just kind of reached in and pulled it out. And I was like, wow, okay, that's fine.
Okay, there you go. Yeah.
Yeah. They put it in a tin, and it was eventually taken out because we had elected to have testing done on the placenta.
Okay.
To see if we could try and get some answers. And ultimately there were none. The only thing that they noticed in the placenta was that it was extremely clotted, is what they said.
Oh.
And they know that COVID is linked to an increase in clotting in mothers, but there's no way to prove whether the clotting happened before he passed away or after, because it would have happened after he passed away as well, to cut off the blood flow.
Yeah.
So we didn't really get any definitive answers. There was nothing that they found. They asked us if we wanted to do an autopsy, and our insurance wouldn't cover it, and I was sick of going back and forth with them. And knowing what I know now, I know that we could have had an autopsy done, but I don't know that I would have. Initially, like, I wanted answers. I wanted them to tell me exactly what caused it, and then once everything happened, the thought of having someone cut into him was too much to think about. So we decided not to.
Yeah.
No autopsy, just the testing of the placenta. We did have the Now I Lay Me Down to Sleep come in, and they were able to take some photos. They're all in black and white. It was free to us, which was amazing. My leadership, they paid for my urn for my son. And the funeral home that we had him sent to, they actually do cremations for babies for free.
Oh,
so
wow. Okay.
there was no charge to us. We had him cremated. Being in the military, the thought of us being stationed somewhere else and leaving him behind was just out of the question to me.
Yeah, exactly.
He's coming home.
Yeah.
So, we did have a priest come in. I'm Christian. My fiance is Catholic. And I went through this really, really dark period so I prayed every day with my son. And I just remember my entire pregnancy feeling like I couldn't see the end of it. I had a feeling that I wasn't going to be able to bring him home.
Really?
And that was a feeling.
Yes.
That was a feeling that I couldn't shake. The entire pregnancy, I couldn't envision the end of my pregnancy. And, like I had talked to my supervisor at the time, and she was like, like that's normal. Like, like it's just nerves. But it was something that had actually kept me up at night. And, there would be nights where I would cry and my fiance would be like, what is wrong? And I'm like, I can't see the end of the pregnancy. And he's like, what are you talking about? Jayce is fine. And it was something that I struggled with from the beginning. And, I do have anxiety. So I figured maybe that's what it is. Like maybe they were right. Like maybe it was just from the moment I found out I was pregnant. Like I said, I was admitted to the hospital 2 days later because of cramping, which was completely fine. They were like, you just need to drink water. And I was like, oh. So having all of this happen was kind of like my worst nightmare come true.
Oh yeah, completely.
And being in the hospital, I stayed the entire 2 days. And I held him. My best friend, she had actually sent me a book when I found out I was pregnant with him. I read the book to him. Anytime you walked into my room, there was cartoons playing on the TV. I didn't know what else to do. And we had my fiance, his mother, she had sent us a willow tree statue when we first found out that we were pregnant. And it was a man and a woman, kind of caressing her bump. And after my son had passed, she sent us, it was another willow tree statue, and it was an angel of prayer. And so we took all the props that we had. That was something that I discussed in the birth plan because we knew that we were going to have these people come out and take photos. So she said, bring whatever you want. And so I said, okay. So we brought everything that we had, and we did end up going to Target that day before we ended up going into the hospital, and we bought a little bear. I think it's a fox. I have it sitting right here. It sits on my nightstand. And it was the first thing that we had bought for him together because we lived in an apartment and we were having our house built. We were like trying to figure out like where we were going to put all of his stuff because we lived in a 1-bedroom. So there was really nothing like nursery wise set up. So we hadn't started to purchase anything. And so we bought this little bear, and I took it with, and I remember in some of the pictures, the bear is in the crib, and you can see the size difference between the bear and my son. And it's something that he was so little, but he was so big as well.
Yeah, exactly.
And we had, while in the hospital, the next day we got moved to the maternity ward. And I found out that my grandmother had passed away the night before. So when my brother was calling my mom, on the phone, it was to tell him that my mother's mom had passed away. And I did not tell my grandma that I was pregnant. So to my knowledge, she didn't know. And I remember my mom telling me, no, she knew, like we told her. And so as sick as it is, I took a huge amount of comfort in knowing that, my baby went up there with my grandma, and it was COVID. So having, my grandma be able to, kind of like I have like in my head a picture of her like holding him and walking through the gates with him. And it brings me like a weird sense of comfort knowing that he's not up there alone. And, and I had a nurse, she had told me, God bless her, she was so sweet. She had told me that she believed that when we spoke to people that we had lost, babies as well, that God opened a little window for them to peek their head down so that way they could hear what you were saying. And that was something for me, like, I feel like if she hadn't said that, I wouldn't have known that it was okay to talk to him after everything. And I remember, because I was so small my entire pregnancy, after I had him, my body went right back to normal. I didn't have anything physically to prove that he was there. And I know it sounds so strange, but I didn't even have so much as a stretch mark. And that was something that, I remember feeling really sad about, because I didn't have anything to prove that he was there. There was nothing. And it was kind of like my body was just like, okay, like that's done. We're going to go back and, like business as usual. And that's what it felt. Like most people would be like, that's your body doing what it's supposed to, sure. But like, I wanted something to be able to remember my son by. It was just a period where, like I was looking, like I wanted to cling to anything that would remind me of him.
Yeah. You're supposed to be pregnant still. Like, yeah.
Right. Immediately after we left the hospital, I went and I had those photos developed because she got them back to me while I was still in the hospital.
Oh, wow. That's great.
Mm-hmm. It was a very fast turnaround. Actually, no, I'm sorry. I took photos on my phone as well.
Oh, okay.
So I had those photos developed. I was going to say, wait a second. I had the photos that I had on my phone developed, and I took those home, and we had a little coffee table, and we put his urn right in the middle. I remember when they were getting ready to discharge us, they were going to take him first. And that was something that I was super uncomfortable with. When we bought his bear, we also bought him a little blanket as well. And we sent the blanket, and I asked the nurse if there was a possibility that we would get the blanket back, and she said probably not. And I said, that's okay. So we made sure that he had something in his little bucket when he went. And I couldn't watch them take him out of the room. I just remember I fell to my knees, and my fiance he had to hold me up because I couldn't watch them take him out of the room, because I knew where he was going. Babies don't belong in the morgue. That's not a thing. So that was something that was really, really hard. And I had told him, I was like, I want to go to the Walgreens so that way, or CVS, wherever, so I can get these pictures developed, because it wasn't enough to just have them on my phone. And so they sent him off to a funeral home, and I had already ordered the urn. And I remember a few days had went by, and I felt like it was taking forever. And, like I was coordinating with the funeral director, and he was super nice. And we were finally able to go and pick up the ashes, but the urn hadn't arrived. And I didn't, there was something about it that I just didn't feel comfortable bringing him home without a place to put him. Yeah. But then ultimately I got over it, because I didn't want him to sit somewhere that wasn't home.
Yeah.
And so we ended up going to the funeral home to pick up his ashes, which was also really hard. But in the military, I have done, I was a part of the honor guard, so I had done quite a bit of military funerals. And when I actually realized which, I wasn't paying attention to which funeral home he was sent to. I just had the address. I didn't really think anything of the name. And when we walked in to go and retrieve his remains, I realized that I had been there before. And that was such a hard feeling, knowing that, like I had been here, like it's something that you don't picture for yourself. It's such a strange thing to remember, but you don't think that you will ever be in this position, especially not for a child, for a baby. And so I remember they came in and they handed us this little velvet looking bag, and I opened it up and there was a little Ziploc baggie with just the smallest amount of ashes ever. And I just remember I cried. And I remember the lady, she was really nice, but I think maybe like my sadness kind of caught her off guard. I don't know, maybe. And it was almost like an uncomfortable situation. I didn't mean to make her uncomfortable. I just remember when she brought it in, I just kind of had a whole nother meltdown. And my fiance, he kind of did all the talking and everything for me. And so I was like, okay. And we left and we went home. And when we got home, actually, our urn was delivered.
Oh, that's perfect.
So, yeah, it was perfect timing. I could not bring myself to take it out of the baggie, so I just put the baggie inside of the container that they have you put the ashes in. And he is with us every day we go. When we moved out of our apartment into this new home, we actually built our home for him. We knew that we wanted to buy a home. But once we found out we were pregnant, buying a home was like so much more important. Like, no, we're not going to have him in an apartment. And we actually moved into the home prior to our actual due date, which was a little bittersweet. And I remember the first night that we spent away from the apartment and in the new house, if we were not sleeping in that house, there was no way I was leaving his urn behind. So like everywhere we went, his urn went.
Yeah.
And that was, that's something that was really important to me, because this house was for him. And when we first moved in, it was really hard looking at all the empty bedrooms, knowing that this was for him. Yeah. Like the driving force behind it was for him. And, he doesn't get to experience it. So it made it really hard. Yeah.
I'm so sorry. Your fiance, you kind of have mentioned him throughout the story, and I can imagine he was quite devastated along the way. Can you tell me about his reactions and when Jayce was born?
I think, and I had it stuck in my head that maybe the pregnancy wasn't real for him, because he wasn't allowed to visit in any of the ultrasounds. So the first time that he actually got to see our son was when he was born. And I think he was kind of awestruck by the fact that, there was a baby, and holy crap, like that's my son too.
Yeah.
So I think there was a sense of pride, like, wow, like we had a little boy. And I remember, like when we first found out everything, he's not a crier. He's very much my protector. And he's the one that like keeps it together when I'm, breaking down in the corner. And after our son had passed and we got the news, to see him cry really broke my spirit. I won't lie. Because that was something that I had not experienced. He's the strong one So when you see the person that is the strong one, like they lose it for a second, I felt even more responsible. And after everything had happened, and when we initially found out, I just remember saying I didn't mean for this to happen. He told me, he was like, it's not your fault. And he had to keep telling me, no, it's not your fault. Like, I don't blame you. It is not your fault that you got sick. Because I felt so much guilt over getting sick, and this being the only thing that they could potentially point the finger at. There's nothing else that they can say, or it could have been this. There's no or.
Yeah.
It's just, you got sick.
Yeah.
We're sorry.
Yeah. I'm sure that is an extra layer of just, there's that guilt that is associated with it, even though it is not your fault that you got sick. And I mean, I honestly think that the pandemic has been so hard on moms, especially ones that have lost babies. It's just an added, feels like another kick when you're down, right?
Definitely.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing. That was such a beautiful story of Jayce Joseph. It's just a really cute name, and I just love that you were able to spend time with him and kind of do a lot of things. I'm really, it just makes me happy when I hear that there are people that are helping lost parents, they guide them through this. And so that woman that wrote that pamphlet and was persistent and really helped you guys figure out what you needed to get done while you were there, then I think that was awesome. And then it sounds like you had wonderful nurses, which is awesome. I love to hear that too, because some people do not have great nurses, and it's like, oh, this is, yeah. Anyway, is there any last things that you would like to say about Jayce, or anything you wanted to say to him?
To him, my favorite thing, I have this picture of him on my desk at work. And, some people might ask, like, why do you have, your stillborn baby on display? And, well, he's my son. And I'm proud of him. I'm proud. He didn't make it as far as we had hoped, but he made it far enough. He made it as far as, God was willing to allow him to. And so for that, I'm proud. I'm proud of him. Definitely. And that I love him. I think that goes without saying.
Yes, for sure. Well, Ryannah, thank you again so much. And we appreciate you sharing your story.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.